when you mentioned Bulgaria and communist Romania and the Soviet Union, I thought about architecture.
Yes.
And you've written about architecture many times, and I know how you feel about Le Corbusier and brutalism and the like.
Yes.
From a more positive point of view, do you have a favorite architect, or at least a style?
No, not really. You see, the problem is that I'm not an architect. I'm not sure I could build anything very well. All I can say is, for example, in the city of Birmingham, there's a little area that modern architects have built that is modern. It's clearly not of any other date but or era but our own, and yet it's highly civilized. It's a very small area, and it's pleasant to be in it. And I can think of very, very few equivalent places, and it's a kind of fairly humane architecture on quite a large scale. It's not, it's not just tiny little cottages with sweet little cottages. It's office buildings, but it's extremely pleasant. Unfortunately, though there is this example before them, the architects in that city and in many other cities continue to build completely inhuman. And it's almost as if they want to be inhuman. And incidentally, this is, I mean, as it happens, today I've been writing an article about music, well, not about music, about a man who survived the Bataclan massacre in Paris.
Yes.
And he's a history teacher, and obviously an intelligent man. I don't agree with all his political views, but he's obviously intelligent and thoughtful. Now, the kind of music, I mean, the music that he likes, I mean, he's 40, he's not a child anymore, he's not an adolescent, he's 40. He thinks that something of this group called the Eagles
of death metal.
Yeah, of death metal. He thinks this is wonderful. And he describes how, as a second concert that he goes to, one of the chaps, one of the people in this band, he is drunk and drugged, he thinks. He breaks the strings of his guitar. He sings badly. He's out of tune. I mean, insofar as there is a tune. And he says, and he's completely in accord with the audience. Well, this seems to me like a Walpurgisnacht. This is a kind of black mass of music. This is, I mean, and it was quite interesting that when I looked up, and I didn't know anything about the Eagles of death metal, which is I think the name alone tells you quite a lot. But for some reason, when I looked it up on YouTube, because I didn't know who they were, so I looked it up. And for some reason, when you look up things on YouTube, there are other things come up as well for you to look at. Suggestion. There was Horowitz playing a Schubert impromptu.
Wow.
So after I finished,
what prompted the YouTube algorithm to suggest Schubert?
Well, maybe I'd looked at Schubert before or something. I don't know. But anyway, so I could stand about a minute of, not even a minute really, of death metal. And I looked at Schubert, and I said, I felt while listening to Schubert, I felt it's a bit, I felt my mind, it had the same effect on my mind as a shower has on my body after I'd been involved in something dirty. Now, the point about this is that the man that I'm writing about is not he's not an unfortunate who comes out of the slums of, the banlieue of Paris, where people don't have any hope and the education is terrible and there are no jobs and so on and so forth. On the contrary, he's well educated, he's intelligent, in a certain way cultivated, and yet he likes this almost satanic music, if that's what you call it. And I thought, this is a culture that is really in danger.
Yeah.
Because we're now talking about the upper 2% of, he would be one of the upper 2% of the population as far as knowledge and education is concerned, I would imagine, or certainly top 5%.
Yes, if history teachers listen to the Eagles of Death Metal, then, when you said Eagles of Death Metal, I agree that it's a ridiculous band name, and I thought of an even more hilarious one. I don't know anything about their music, but from the name of the band, I already know what to expect, and I've protected myself from it. The name of the band is I Love You, But I've Chosen Darkness.
Yes. Well, in a way, that's what they've done. They've chosen darkness.
Yeah.
Evil be thou my good.
Mm-hmm.
Ugliness be thou my beauty, in fact. And our architects have done the same, incidentally. Yeah.
Do you know why?
Yeah, that's my problem.
After writing so much on the problem, have you come closer to the answer why it happened?
I don't know. I suspect part of the problem is this kind of romantic cult of originality.
Mm-hmm. Originality at all costs, no matter.
At all costs, yes. Originality as a virtue in itself. And I could say, like many virtues, it's not a virtue in itself.
Yes.
There's nothing easier than to be original. But as I quote Dr. Johnson, who said of an author's book, he said to the author, your book is both good and original, but the parts which are original are not good. The parts which are good are not original.
What do you call that? What's the term for this kind of compliment that's not really a compliment?
Yes. Well, a backhanded compliment. Well, it's not in fact, it's not a compliment at all.
Yeah. Course. On the surface, it sounds a little bit like a compliment, but it's actually a terrible blow.
It's utter condemnation.
Yes.
It's like Disraeli once was at a dinner, a large dinner, public dinner, and at the end of the meal they served some champagne, and he said, "Thank God for something warm at last."
British humor at its best, but you've also written about how British humor is in decline as well.
Yes, well, I think partly because of political correctness, and politicians now are afraid to make a joke because someone will take it seriously. Or claim to be offended, because people like to be offended. Actually, they like to feel offended, or they like to feel that they feel offended. It's all very dishonest, but of course, if they're outraged, I suppose they feel they must be good people, because only good people feel outrage. Yes, so I think, when I was growing up, almost every class of person spoke in a slightly ironical fashion. I remember this was a very fine example of it, I think. I was speaking to a patient. He was a taxi driver, and this was quite a long time ago. And I asked him to describe his childhood, and I said, "Where did you live?" And he gave the address, And then he said, we lived there until Adolf Hitler moved us on. And what he was describing, of course, was his house being bombed.
Yeah, yeah. But with the stiff upper lip attitude
and the detachment.
Yeah, yeah.
Which of course makes it much easier to accept. Not to accept in the sense you think it's a good thing, but to
bear it.
To bear it and to overcome it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There isn't anything like, I don't think there's anything like that now. At least I haven't. It still exists a bit. I remember, anyway, I won't go on about that. But yes, I think the humor is in decline.
I have a few comedians that I think have preserved this sense of irony and humor.
Yes.
Sometimes their message is very, for example, when Louis C.K., the American comedian, speaks so liberally of getting married and then getting a divorce. That's a wonderful thing. Why would you want your marriage to last? Married, get divorced, great. Then do it one more time, great. And so it's very funny. At the same time, you're thinking this powerful, influential man should not be attacking the institution of marriage when it's already almost dead. But the comedy is
well,
good. I have to admit, the comedy is pretty good.
Yeah, but you could say of that little bit that you've just quoted, that actually he's defending marriage, not attacking it.
Mm-hmm.
Because what he's saying is your modern view of marriage is that it's just disposable, is shallow.
Yeah.
This is extremely shallow.
Yeah. Well, if that's the case, then he is extremely clever.
Well, when you said it to me, that was what I immediately thought.
Mm-hmm.
That this is a man attacking more modern manners, not someone who's attacking marriage.
Mm-hmm. Besides Turgenev and Dr. Johnson, who would you say are your most favorite writers?
Well, I don't really think in terms of that, because often you end up thinking as if writing is a football league. So in the first division, you have these people, and in the other. Since you've been to China, how long were you there?
Almost 2 years.
Yes. I don't know whether you know of a writer called Simon Leys. Did you?
I know about him from you, and I have read several of his books. Not the most famous one about China.
Yes.
But I did read The Whole of Uselessness.
Yes.
And a couple more. The one about Napoleon.
Yes.
Maybe one more.
Yes.
Wonderful. He is a wonderful
writer.
And I agree.
Yeah, if I were trying to teach someone how to write an essay, I would give them his literary essays to. Of course, he was brilliant on China as well, but he was a wonderful literary essayist. And somehow he, when you read him, the moment I don't know how he conveys this, but the moment you start, you think, this is a man of integrity. This is a man who believes what he says, is interested in the truth, and so on. And yet he's also very amusing. And he has the art of conveying an enormous amount of meaning in a very short space. So as I said, if I had a class of people teaching them to write essays, I would give them him to read.
Anyone else?
Well, I don't really think in those terms, actually.
You spoke very highly of Clockwork Orange.
I did, yes.
Do you? What is your estimation of Burgess in whole, as a whole?
Well, I've only read a certain amount of him. I think he was a most remarkable man. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And brilliantly gifted. I don't know how much of what he wrote will survive. I don't know. Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it. Well, you're very keen on him.
I'm very keen on Anthony Burgess for sure. I discovered your work roughly at the same time as the work of Sir Roger Scruton.
Ah, yes.
I admire him tremendously. Lawrence, obviously. I tend to agree that Lady Chatterley is bad, but in books like The Rainbow and Women in Love and maybe The Prussian Officer,
yes,
he does display remarkable gifts, let's say.
Oh yeah, I would have to accept that. Yes. Yeah.
You also said something about I don't have this book of yours about illness as inspiration. Is it an anthology?
Yes. Well, it's not. It's not an anthology. It's a illness as inspiration is my book of essays about poets and illness. And how
but it's your essays.
It's my essays with quotations from the poems.
Right.
And I can't remember how many. And they're short. They're about 3 pages long each essay. I can't remember how many poets there are. Maybe 60 or something like that. 80. I don't know. Some very well known. Some completely unknown. Some doctors, for example. And all either British or American. I didn't do any foreign or any non-English writers.
Yes.
Non-English-speaking writers. I'll tell you one writer that I really like is Conrad.
Conrad, yes, of course. Not just Heart of Darkness, but
no, he's a wonderful writer.